Hi, I'm Rachel Lancaster, and this is the Magnificent Midlife Podcast. This is where we celebrate women in midlife and beyond. We challenge the status quo and bash those negative stereotypes about being an older woman. We're not over the hill at 40, 50, 60. We're just getting started. And the world needs us now more than ever. I'll be talking all things midlife, about issues that matter, and sharing fabulous stories of amazing women doing very cool stuff. Now's our time. Today I have two guests to introduce you to. I have Colleen Rosenblum and Bridgett Garratt, who are the hosts of a very cool podcast called Hot Flashes and Cool Topics. Isn't that a great title?
We think
welcome,
so.
Welcome, ladies.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
It's lovely to have you here. So I'm going to kick off. I don't know which one of you wants to go first, but my first question is, how did you decide to start a podcast and how did you come up with that name?
I'll do the podcast and you can talk about the name and you can interject. We were at lunch one day with friends, and Colleen and I were both kind of wanting to come to a close to our second careers. So Colleen was an attorney and I was a teacher, and then she was a Pilates instructor and I was in acting. And I was like, I just came off doing a short film that I just did not enjoy doing it at all. And I thought, I just don't know how much I want to do this anymore. And we were with some other women that were pivoting in their lives, like changing up what they were doing. And we kind of came up with it then at that time. And we were realizing there wasn't a lot out there for midlife women. There were a lot of podcasts that were really good, but they tended to focus on one specific area of a woman's life. It could be the empty nesting. It could be dating. It could be going through the silver divorce. It could be finances. But we just wanted to have something where we could share all of that information. And so we were, that was about in July of 2019. So Colleen, if you want to come up, interject.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Bridgett. So we after that lunch, we kind of did some research, and we discovered that there, like yours, some great podcasts out there, but we kind of wanted to be the umbrella for everything. So we thought, okay, everybody says your title is kind of everything. You want people to recognize you instantly. So we thought, well, Hot Flashes, midlife women are going to know that instantly. But because we wanted to cover so many different topics, we thought, okay, topics, cool topics. So Hot Flashes and Cool Topics was born. And I have to say, probably the biggest compliment we get all the time is, I love your title. I love the title of your podcast because it's just very catchy and kind of covers the bases for everything. So we're happy with it. We were glad we came up with it.
So you've talked about, previous careers and obviously there does seem to be a theme, doesn't there, in midlife of this reinvention that we want to do something else. Why do you think that is?
I think, you spend so much time on everyone else when you're younger, whether it be developing a career or taking care of your family. You get married, you have kids, you raise your children. But during those decades, and they usually are decades, you're not really focused on yourself. And there comes a time, I think, for every woman in their 40s, 50s, or 60s, where all of a sudden they are given this opportunity. I won't say permission because you always have permission, but given the opportunity to kind of slow down and say, wait a second, I had these dreams, I had these talents, I had these aspirations that I didn't get rid of, but I just kind of put on a side burner while I prioritized my life. And now it's time for me to be a priority. It's time for me to kind of reevaluate and say, you know what? I might not want to do what I wanted to do in my 20s, but there's something I want to do. And it's time to figure that out.
A lot of women follow a certain path that they see that their siblings did, or that, I don't know, what most women do. This is what you're supposed to do. You were supposed to go to school, hopefully go to university or do something like that, and then get married. And do your career, maybe. And that was a very traditional thing. And a lot of women did that. I know luckily I married someone that I really like and that I love and I get along with. So, but I know a lot of friends that felt like they were supposed to follow that path. And they probably married someone they shouldn't have married. Or, I hate to say shouldn't because they probably had great kids. But But then after they did that and they realized, I'm not happy, this is not fulfilling. And just like Colleen said, then you're raising your kids, then they get to midlife and things change. Their kids move out. They think, who is this person that I'm with? I don't want to be with this person. And they look for something else in life. So I think a lot of women are looking just for something, they know they deserve to be happy now. A lot of women had the guilt that they didn't deserve this next step and thought that that was it. So I do think when they get to this life or this point in their life, that they're looking for some fulfillment and that they're not afraid to try it. And some may not know what to do next. So we're hoping that our podcast will help them find some paths to take to just say, hey, this is a great thing to do, or I can try this. And it's not a big deal if it doesn't work out. It's not really a failure. It's just something I tried, and then I'll try something else. So I don't know. I think that's why they're doing this at this stage in their life.
I think absolutely right. There's like a plan for the first half, isn't there? And then it all just sort of, I think it's like the toys get thrown out of the pram in midlife. Like, let's chuck it all up in the air and see where everything lands. And sometimes it's a bit messy, isn't it?
And there's also that cultural lag because, in the early 1900s, we weren't living to 80s and 90s. So when you hit your 50s, well, you were kind of hitting that last stage of life. Now you could be living another 30, 40 years. We are really truly in the middle. So what do you want to do with that next stage? There's no longer, like you said, this plan. Oh, we're going to get married and I'm going to have a great job and I'm going to raise a great family. And then, well, now you get to decide what your plan is, with or without your spouse or significant other, with or without your kids. I mean, it's kind of up to you how you want to define it. And that's a great and frightening place to be.
Yeah, because we've got more years in the middle, haven't we? But Colleen, you met your other half at school, didn't you?
Yes, I met my husband when I was 17. He was also 17. If someone had told me that he would be my husband, 35 years later, I would have been like, what? But I have been gifted with a spouse that is my partner. And I'm very grateful for that. He and I support each other, very similar with John and Bridgett. We support each other. We kind of went through the journey of life together. We both went to law school. We both became attorneys. He immediately gravitated to it. I couldn't crawl out of it fast enough. But it's always he's been my support system and I've been his. So I think for women who reach this stage and their children are no longer home, you either recognize that person has been your support system or you don't recognize that person at all. And you're like, who is this that I've spent my life with? So I'm grateful that it turned out well, but I know a lot of women that it didn't turn out that way.
Yeah. And I met my husband when he was 19, I was 20, and we were in college. But we didn't go to the same university. We were set up on a blind date and got along great. This friend of mine that I've known since I was a little girl, and her boyfriend at the time, now husband, was a friend of my husband's. And he just kind of knew, my friend's husband knew that we would get along for some reason. And he was doing an internship that summer when I was at University of Kentucky. And so we did a long distance relationship for about 3 years and then got married. But he was 22 and I was 23 when we got married. So we're going on 29 years in June.
We still like each other.
He's great. And I know that I'm just very fortunate that I have a great partner too. Like, I think Colleen and I both, like Randy and John, are just so supportive. Like, hey, what are you doing? Hey, that sounds good. And Colleen and I are like, well, we're going to a conference this weekend. See you later. Okay. All right. See you when you get never.
And they were like, we said we're starting a podcast, and they were like, okay, go for it. But they didn't quite understand.
Do they listen?
My husband does not.
My husband does. And it's so funny. He has teased me so much about, he might be a few weeks behind. And he came in, I think it was at the beginning, Colleen, or maybe we were talking about sleep. there was an episode about sleep, and I was talking about how my cat wakes him up at night, but the cat doesn't bother me at all. And he came and said, I was listening to this podcast, and this woman chose her cat over her husband, and her friend agreed with her. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. And he's like, it was you. It was you. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. But he does listen.
Mine does not. He has no interest in podcasts. He's not on Facebook. He's not on Instagram. He's not on any social media except for LinkedIn for business. And he just doesn't do that.
My husband does. I don't think my children do. And my daughter, I think, has listened to a few. My son, I don't think listens.
And Colleen, how do you feel about that you've got this major new venture and he's not listening?
I'm fine with it. If he were to do a podcast, it would either be on like he and John would do one on bourbon or whiskey or cars. I'd have no interest in it. So why would I expect him to have an interest in women's midlife crisis? You know what I mean? Like, I think he's very supportive. He asks questions about topics. I'll talk. We have this daily walking routine because we're during COVID, and I'll tell him all about what we're doing. But no, I don't mind because we've reached that level where we're individuals. You do you, I'll do me. Be supportive, but that doesn't mean I expect you to listen.
Everyone.
They might learn a lot though.
Yeah.
Like Colleen said, John's would just be on finance. Like personal finance, I like, but business finance, I'm like, oh, snooze fest.
Then we'd have to tell them we were listening when we really weren't.
And then they quiz us. No. Yeah.
Yeah, it can be slightly contentious, can't it?
Oh, yeah.
It's like, do you want them to listen or not?
I know.
Can you talk openly if they are listening? But then again, it is a public forum, isn't it? What we're doing is totally public and everybody can hear everything. So
yeah.
And many of his friends' wives listen. So I'm sure he's hearing it from his guy friends. Oh, your wife talked about X, Y, and Z. And so I guess I have to be a little careful about that.
Okay, so these long-standing husbands, are they open to talking about hot flashes? Have they been supportive about menopause for you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Extremely. They may not understand it, but they're totally at least for my experience, my husband is totally supportive. We were talking to a guest recently, and it was funny because she was saying how you have this hot flash or night sweat, and your main focus is not make me feel comfortable, but not wake my spouse up as I get out of bed. Like, don't make them uncomfortable. But they are uncomfortable because sometimes they don't recognize who you are when you're going through hormonal changes. So educating them is really helpful for women, and being able to talk to their spouses is really helpful. So, my husband may zone out a little bit when I'm talking about it.
Yeah. And yeah. Oh, go ahead. Or I was just gonna add to that, with my husband, I think the educating them on what's going on with you. And through doing this podcast, I have learned so much. In addition to what was happening to me, what I kind of knew on the surface, but the more people we've interviewed that have specialized in menopause and what your hormones are doing, I think it's helped me. He works for a company, and I said, you've got a lot of women in your office, and this is something perhaps you should be bringing to the forefront at your company. It's not his company. He works for a company, but you have a lot of women, and a lot of women that are in the menopausal age, and maybe you guys should be looking at this and bringing this into your human resource department and having things available for the women that work for you. I think it's just going to make your workplace a happier place. And I think I talked to him about, Colleen, help me with the name, the woman who does. I know.
Idea.
Yes, that does the talks and the workshops. Yes, for women in the workplace, just because of what happened to her and how she wanted to change that. And I thought that would be a really cool thing for, you're in business to maybe introduce and bring that over and have it just maybe other businesses will catch on to that and bring this for women. So that's been a cool thing that I can share with him. He's in a completely different field of work that I was in. And I just hope that could spread some news.
Because there's been a lot of initiatives in the UK about that, about raising the conversation in the workplace and getting women support.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Lauren lives in the UK.
Yeah, it's UK has been so much, I feel like, advanced than the United States. There might be parts of the United States.
Yes. When we do the research, oftentimes we end up interviewing somebody in the UK because they have already come up with an idea that we in the States are a little far behind. We're like a good year behind in menopause, whether it be in the workplace or menopause retreats. When we discovered that was a thing, we were like, how fast can we get on the plane?
And then COVID happened.
We want to create one, and because there's no such thing as that. Midlife retreats in the city. There's yoga, there's all those other myriad of things, but actual midlife women talking about midlife issues, it's very difficult to find that in the States.
It's still quite new over here, but I do think, we are doing more here. And now there's even, which I think is brilliant, government initiatives to get menopause on the curriculum. So that sex education doesn't end with childbirth. It goes all the way through.
We interviewed Claire Shepherd from Know Your Menopause, who's also in the UK. And we interviewed her just after she spoke on Parliament. And we just kept saying, why is this not happening in the States? Why is this not happening? I mean, it's a simple poster that you can put in a doctor's office. You don't walk into an OBGYN in the States and see a poster saying, know your menopause.
But that's only happened in the last 12 months. But that has been a very, very powerful campaign. They've done a phenomenal job with that. Yeah.
But it's great to see that. And that's where we're hearing about it more, is from the women in the UK that are bringing it to the forefront. Yeah.
We need to catch up over here. For as open as everyone thinks the States is, you say the word menopause and people run.
24 months ago, 2 years, they would have done the same thing here. I mean, I've been banging this drum since last 5 years, since I first started my magazine. And it's very, very difficult to get people to talk. And even what really gets my goat is that it's overwhelmingly negative. And even now it's still, it's very much something to be endured, which is not quite the way I see it. But, so that's kind of what I'm working on, is like trying to, make it a time of transformation rather than a time of endurance. But it's still challenging. But I think any kind of conversation is wonderful. I guested on an American podcast called the FKU 50 podcast, which was 3 men in Florida, and there was little old me, and I was doing a man's guide to menopause.
That's awesome though.
All I wanted to talk about was sex, and I was like saying, but there's so much more. It's not just about that. That was it. That was it. It was like, and they kept going back to it. And I was like, oh, come on. I didn't come on just to talk about libido.
Oh my goodness.
Finding ourselves and being off the estrogen roller coaster. And it's fantastic and it's great. And we're more focused and we can focus on ourselves for a change. But no, it's all about what happens to our vaginas.
But what was the doctor which doc? I see Colleen's got to help me.
Sherry. Dr. Sherry. Yeah. Our sexual desire is in the brain, not below the belt. So if men really want to understand, then they need to put a little effort in the mental part.
They can't switch between either ignoring us or fighting with us to having a nice, juicy, intimate experience the next minute. Like, no.
Yes.
Work on it.
Oh gosh.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They can just flip the switch. I think Dr. Sherry said we need like 20 minutes. Like, you got to give us some time.
She was so funny. Oh my gosh. She'd be a great person to interview if you get a chance. Yeah. Yeah.
She's right. It's an interesting conversation to mix some men in the mix to talk about menopause, and because they say menopause too, so their testosterone levels go down as well.
I think it's I think it's a fascinating time. I'm fascinated by what happens to all of us, and the sort of the journey we go on, or the corners we turn, or what is going on. I'm very curious as to what will happen next. So it's a cool time. I think it's a very cool time. Cool topic.
Part of what we're trying to do is really help reframe the conversation to the future versus the past.
Absolutely.
Because so many women say, my best times are behind me. And that's selling yourself so short. You're going to miss out on so many things by spending the time looking backwards. You're missing everything that's in front of you. So if we can somehow, and it's a habit, it's a practice of retraining women to just look forward to one thing a day. Just start small, but look forward to things, because you've got a lot of decades left on this planet. And how do you want to spend those? And what do you want your children to see you doing? Like, you don't want your children to see you kind of go, okay, I'm done. I'll just
shrivel up. Yeah.
Depressed. Yeah. You want your young daughters to see, oh, okay, menopause is a transitional life, and then they move on to something else.
And you want your sons to see that too.
Exactly.
So not just daughters. Yeah. So they can treat women in their life, know what to expect when these things happen.
But when it is talked about, it's just, certainly menopause is framed as a time of loss, isn't it? It's what we're losing.
It sure is.
Right. And honestly, when people say to us, well, we're losing the ability to have children, do you want any now? Like, were you planning on getting pregnant? Like, really? Now at 50? I mean, I understand that there are certain times in surgical menopause or early menopause where women in their, late 30s, early 40s are still considering that option. And of course I respect that. But a 50-year-old woman going through menopause, like, you don't have your periods anymore. Rejoice in that. You don't have to stress. Yes, it's a transition, and sometimes the symptoms are horrible, and you could talk to your doctors. Research first, because a lot of doctors are not as educated as we'd like them to be. But come on, there are benefits too. Like, you don't have to plan a vacation, around your periods anymore. And you don't have to carry a lot of stuff with you for your periods. And there are benefits to this, So I hope, Bridgett and I hope that people see that it's not all, there is a freedom that comes from this transition.
And I love just all the things available, to try, just like try this class, hey, you want to try this thing. You don't have the obligations there. Typically, a lot of women do have small children still. They may have had them in their late 40s. But just the things that are available for you. It's so great. And really, there's nothing wrong with having a senior citizen discount. I'm like, I've got a few more years to get that 55 mark.
I know, right?
But it's so funny when you turn 50. I don't know how it is in the UK, but in the United States, you get this thing in the mail, AARP, which I don't even, do you guys have AARP?
I've heard of them. I've heard of AARP. Yeah.
You turn 50 and you get AARP. It's like Association of Retired People, which we're not retired. Again, it's an older company that actually talks about retirement. Who retires in their 50s? Like, that's just not.
But you get a discount from them.
And it's like a little bitty discounts on like movies,
restaurants, hotels, movies.
It's not a huge discount, but it's something. If you go to movies a lot and you do things like that, it's a little something with a little bit of a discount.
And if you go to a hotel, they'll say, do you have your AARP discount? And you're like, yes, I do. You know what I mean?
Wow. Yeah, we don't get anything at all until we turn 60. And then if you get a free bus pass.
Oh, wow.
So what have you learned from the guests that you've had on your podcast, or since you started the podcast? What are the really fabulous things that you've learned?
I mean, I've learned that we are actually capable of understanding the technical aspects of this. That was a frightening concept when we started. I mean, we literally pressed record and figured we'll just go along and figure this out, having no clue how complicated having a podcast done. So just feeling, I think for a lot of women, and I won't put myself in that category. The charge of learning something new is a great feeling. Knowing that you are still learning and growing and experiencing and being educated. Because I think with each person we have on, we learn a little bit more about something. We take a little bit, a piece from each. And hopefully that's what the listeners do. So the fact that we can still like technically understand what we're doing is amazing. Because sometimes we were like, what is happening? And also, you know, there was a really interesting, we talked to a couple of different doctors about estrogen levels. And one of the things that came out was that as your estrogen decreases in your life, the need to nurture changes. You still have that need to be a parent. Bridgett and I are both helicopter up our kids' nose parents, but there is a disconnect that happens. We didn't realize that it was a hormonal thing. Like you couldn't understand why all of a sudden you were like, I want to start doing something here beyond the nurturing. Yes, nurture, but plus something. And that's an actual hormonal change in your body. And that was something that when she said that, I was like, oh, light bulb moment. That was a, aha moment. So women who start to feel that way, don't feel guilty. Don't feel like you're doing something wrong. It's your hormones. It's an actual mind shift in your brain that'll kind of gives you permission to focus on yourself a little bit. So appreciate it. Don't be afraid of it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Magnificent Midlife Podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, share it, and leave me a review wherever you're listening. It really helps me get the message out. You can find out more information about this episode in the show notes at magnificentmidlife.com. That's also where you'll find strategies, support, and resources to help make your midlife magnificent. Get clarity on how to make the most of your next chapter. Help me change the world, one magnificent midlife woman at a time.